Hello guys, and welcome to this Zoom clone application. So I got a couple of requests to actually make a full stack Zoom clone application. So I decided to go ahead and do something similar to that. We are not going to be building everything like the design you see here, but you're going to have pretty much this kind of screen. So let me just go ahead and refresh this application so that you can actually see that screen. But you have seen the video aspect of this. And we are going to just take this screen over here, this design over here, and also this one over here. So this one over here is exactly the one that was displaying the camera. So this is what we are going to be working on this video tutorial. So before you begin to proceed, please make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button. So guys, before you begin, just check on the description section. You're going to see a link to this boilerplate. So for the design, I'm not going to touch anything about design because I just prepared it. So whenever you get a boilerplate, you can easily run the application and you're still going to have this same view I have right here inside the emulator. And also for the server itself, we are going to be using the boilerplate server. So if you check here, we have the PeerJS server, and also I kind of connected socket.io over here. So we are gonna just connect with our Mongoose database, then we can move ahead. And if you want to run that, you can just quickly run npm run dev. You can make use of the node mon and run the server. So right here, let's go ahead and connect our MongoDB. So beneath here, I'm just going to connect to MongoDB. So which is gonna use the mongoose.connect, and it's going to accept our database, and it's going to use the new URL parser. We also have to use the created index and true, set that to true as well. Then we have to use the unified topology. We have to set that to true. And lastly, we can use the use find and modify. So why we make use of these things is because sometimes Mongoose objects kind of depreciate. So you have to keep up to date in order to understand how to use all these things from the official documentation. So whenever we connect, we have to console or log that in our server, something like we could say console.log mongodb connected, and then we can catch any error in case we have any error. So we can just display that error immediately, and then we can save. So hopefully when I open my server over here, we are not supposed to be getting any error. So that is telling us that Mongo pass error connection string. So the connection string means that you need to make sure you have your connection string from this config. So right here you could see that it is empty. So that's because I actually removed my own. So just go ahead and create this connection string. If you check in one of the video tutorials we did earlier, that's the Amazon Fullstack application, you could see how we connected the Mongoose. So just go ahead and watch the beginning part of those videos. Of that video, actually I think it's part 1. Then you can see how you can make use of that to connect your MongoDB. So right now I've connected mine. So I think I have to just resave and check back in my console. So right here you could see we have Mongo connected. So that's the only thing we have to do for now on our server. And the next thing is just to go over to application, where we are going to be using the first screen over here is the splash screen, which actually shows that little zoom application. So if I refresh this, you will see the zoom splash screen that is going to display at the first instance. So this is the splash screen. And after this splash screen is going to bring us to this login screen. So this login screen is where we are going to be using Redux to actually dispatch actions. So whenever we log in, we are going to dispatch a login with the password and email. And then of course, we are not using registration. So even if you remove that, we don't have an issue. So I actually disabled the back handler button because I don't want, in the case that I click on back, then it has to quit the application immediately. So it's all there in the boilerplate, but when we click on this login, it's gonna bring us to these auth actions. So I didn't want to explain this as well. So if you really want to understand how we do authentication, also check back on that Amazon clone application. You can see how we did a full stack authentication with Redux and also JSON Web Token to actually get a token to store in our application and use that to communicate with our database through JSON Web Token and return a user for an active logged in user. So that's what we did over there. And if you check at the top here, you could see our types. So when we go over to these types, we are going to be adding the video chat action types, which we are going to use for this particular video. But here you could see we have these types for authentication. We have register success, login success, load user, and also all users. So all users is what we are going to be making use of in this user list to dispatch all users from our active users from our Mongoose database, and then we can display it here. So this is just a dummy user that I had created earlier. So this really doesn't matter, but if you can just go ahead and test them out. So for now, I'm just going to close this and we can go back to that auth actions. Now inside this function, whenever a user logs in, we have to make sure that there is an email or there is a password. So in the case all those things are not there, we just have to block that user from doing anything. But in case there is a user, then we can dispatch a type of login success, and then we can pass a payload of user. So this user object is going to accept a name, and the name is gonna be user. Then we use backtick and add a user underscore. Here we are gonna use a random ID. Like I told you, I'm not gonna be doing a server authentication with this application because I don't want it to take much time. So if you really want to understand, like I said initially, just go ahead and watch the Amazon crash course. Sorry, Amazon full stack application we built. You're gonna understand everything there. And we are gonna also have a UID. So UID is gonna be ID underscore a random ID as well. So this is a function. So make sure you put the parentheses. And lastly, we have to pass that user email. So the email is unique. We are gonna be using that email to store that in our database. So whenever we dispatch to login success, so the login success is going to be made use of this. I think in login screen right here, whenever we log in success, this is going to be set to true. And whenever this is set to true, then we now replace the current screen, which is the login screen, with the user list screen. So if we just go ahead and give that a try, I think it should work. So I'm just going to give that just a random username and password. And immediately I hit on login, you could see automatically it brings me to the user list screen. So back here, whenever we log in, we have to set dispatch a set user with the email and also with a password. So this is not supposed to be an object, it's just supposed to be like that. So the set user here is because I want to store this with assigned storage. I don't want to be logging in whenever we reload the application, which is going to spend our time unnecessarily. So it's better that we use assigned storage and store the users, and then we can check with the load user if the user is already in assigned storage. Then whenever a user is found in assigned storage, we move over to the user list. So I'm just going to quickly do that so we can set the email to email. I'm just going to grab this, and then we can set the password to password. So that's it for this. Then lastly, for the load user, we just have to grab that email. So you can actually use something like assign storage.getAll, but let's just do this for individual data. So which is going to be assign storage.getItem, and we have to grab the email with the key, and also we can grab the password. Then we have to check whether there is an email and also whether there is a password. So these two values has to be set, which is going to give us a true value. Then we can dispatch again login. So whenever this is found, we just have to dispatch login. So login actually does the same thing like says the user, but Why we did this like this is because we just want this first one over here, which is going to dispatch this login success and automatically takes us inside the user list. So when we go ahead and refresh the application, that should actually work perfectly. So right now you see automatically it brings us to that user list screen. So right away, let's go ahead and start grabbing our users from our Mongoose database, which is now going to make us use the socket.io in order to create a room and also grab the users in active rooms from this user list. And whenever we come over to this user list, you could see we have an action being dispatched called user join. So it's going to join this user to active chat in the Mongoose database. So I'm just going to click on that function and come over here. So before we start making use of this function, first of all, we have to go over to our types.js. So make sure you come over to these actions and select types.js. And let's go ahead and put down types for the video actions or the stream actions. So I'm just going to, the first one is going to be join chat, which is just going to be a join chat, just going to be a repetition of the keys. So I'm just going to join chat. The second one is add stream, which is going to add a user stream to the store. And the third one is my stream. So this my stream is very important because it kind of sets your own stream on a different store key. And then we have add remote stream. So add remote stream is still going to add the remote streams or the users connected from other streams to our own. It's gonna add all those streams into the same stream. So that is remote stream. And lastly, what we have is add peer ID. Hide my peer ID. So hide my peer ID is something that we can use to add our own peer IDs to the store. So whenever we disconnect, we can actually make use of that, but let's just go ahead till we get to that point. Then we can see whether we can actually use this add my peer ID. So the next thing is coming over to these video actions. Let me go ahead and close this user list. So whenever a user comes over here, we have to make use of these user actions. So right now, the first thing we have to do is to grab a room ID. So let's just say active room ID. So you could see we emitted join general room. So this join general room actually is also a room that we can actually use to, let's say we want to send a message to all the users uniquely, so that every user kind of receive that message we emit. So we can make use of this ID over here, but I don't think we are going to be making use of that. But let's focus on the main thing that we want to do. So we just grab that, and then we can grab the current user and also all the users from the state. So we can get the state from the auth, and then we can grab our ID. So our ID is going to be coming from, I think we can actually grab our ID from, okay, let's just put this away for now. I think make this work in another way. So first of all, we have to check whether the user that just joined exists, and that will lead us to using the socket. So we emit user exists, which is the current user that is using the mobile phone. And whenever we emit the user, the socket ID of that user, and also we have to set the socket ID to the socket.id. So you are going to know why we are using the socket.id shortly. And let's go ahead and open our server. So this will now lead us to close other tabs and just focus on these two parts so that we can make use of our socket to actually connect all the users. Right away inside here, the first thing we have to do is to make sure that all the user is connected on this join general room. So this join general room, like I said, is like you can use it for messages, or you can use it for a toast messages. So we can say socket on join general room we just have to grab the room ID of that user, and then inside this callback, so make sure you wrap this inside a parenthesis and then give it a callback. You just have to join that user on that room ID. So that's just what you have to do. So the socket kind of uses socket ID to join on that room. Then the next thing we have to do is to check for socket.on user exist. So this user exists initially, like I said, it's gonna be checking from Mongoose database, and it's gonna be getting the user and also the socket ID. And whenever we check whether the user exists, so let's say check whether the new user or the existing user exists in active chat. So that will lead us to create something called schema, because for the active chat, we are not just going to be using something like an ID. We are going to be using our database. That's why we are using Mongoose database at the top. So here I'm going to create a folder called schema. So inside this schema, I'm going to create a file called active.js. So gradually, let's just flow along. And the first thing we have to do is to bring in the Mongoose, which is going to require the Mongoose. And it's going to bring in the schema as well, which is going to use the mongoose.schema. So let's just get some unique ID from UUID, because we want to use that to set the UID that we actually made use of in while we tried to make use of the login button. So the UID is just going to be a random unique ID, and we are using UUID for that. So right here, you just have to grab the version 4, and you can map that, I think, yeah, version 4, and you can map that to UUID v4. Then we can just create an active schema. So let me close this left pane. So inside this schema is going to be taking the schema, sorry for that, which is going to be taking the new schema. So this is small c, so that's why we had that issue. And we have to make sure we have a type of name, the name of the user that just connected, which is a type of string, and it must be required, which is the true. And we also need the socket ID, which is as well a type of string. And we also need to require that, which is true. And we also have to make sure we have a UID. But for the UID, we are going to be giving it a default value with the UUID that we brought at the top, which is going to have a default value of UUID version 4. And make sure you put a parenthesis at the back. Then lastly, we have an email type of string with required of true as well. So make sure you type this correctly, which is true. And lastly, we are going to create a database using the a table using the schema or a collection, and we are just going to call it active. So we could say mongoose.model equals to active chats. So this is going to be the collection or the model or the table if you're coming from MySQL. So you could see that's how we can create a schema. So whenever we create a schema, we now have to make use of that schema to check whether the user actually does exist before we proceed. So back in our server, what we have to do right now is to check with the active. So sorry for that. Before you proceed, make sure you bring that at the top, so I can say active is equal to require. It's going to require from the schema, and we can require the active. And here we have to find one, and first of all we have to find the user. So before we find an update, so we can find one user with the email address, and the email address is going to be the user.email. And then if that user truly exists, we can get that user, and then inside this callback we have to emit found to last connected user. So what we are actually doing here is we have to emit we have to emit, yes, we have to emit that this user is actually found. So here we can emit socket.emit that this user was found, because you're going to be catching that on our client application, and then we pass that user, that current user that just connected. So for the socket ID, I think we don't actually need it here, but let me kind of leave it for now in case we are still going to be making use of it, or making reference to it as we move on. And whenever this user is found, back in our video actions, we can just say user is found. We can just listing for that user found, which is going to grab that same user that just connected, and with that same user, or let's just call it current user. So with that same current user, we have to check whether there is actually a current user. So in case there is a current user, we have to now update that user. So what we are going to be updating is the socket ID of that user, and when we update that user, then we emit to other users that this user has actually joined. So here we are emitting that user, so it's still the same current user. So even if we do something like current user, it's still not an issue. Then for the socket ID, we can set same socket ID, or we can actually send back the socket ID as well, but just know that it's still going to be that same user, because we are using an IO emitter here. So this is supposed to be an IO emitter, not socket emitter. So sorry guys for that. This is supposed to be an IO emitter, so we just have to, yes, sorry, I made a mistake here. So this is IO in socket ID, so that same user actually, not other users. We have to emit user found to that user that just connected last, and then we send back that user. So back in our video actions, so make this correction. I kind of didn't get that in the first place. So we get the same user gets this user found, and then it's gonna update itself, which is the current user, or this same user is as well coming from the Redux or the store of that same user. Then we just have to update the socket ID of that user, and then we can pass the all user room ID. So the all user room ID, we can just quickly come to the top here and create a const called all user room ID, which is just going to be a random user. So sorry for that guys, dogs at the street just disturbing. So let's go ahead and update the user that just joined. So this all user room ID is similar to this join general room ID, but for this one we are going to be using this one for our user list. We are not going to be using this, like I said, you can actually use this one for something like a general message or something unique. It's more like this as well, but just know that we just want to use this one for our users list. So whenever there is a user, the user have to be updated if the user is actually found. But in the case that the user is not found, we just have to use the else statement, and then we can just emit something called emit an event called user join, which is to join the active chat and store the active user in our database, and also join the same user on this all user room ID. So we can just pass the socket ID to be the socket ID of that user. So this is like a new connection, while this is like an existing connection. So let's go ahead and handle for both of these connections, or both of these emitters. And coming back here, so beneath this find one, we can just go ahead and update. So sorry for that. Update user if found. So that will take the on update user. So on update user is actually this one over here, update user, and whenever we catch that update user, we just have to grab the user that's been updated, the socket ID of that user, and also all the user room ID. which we are going to be using for our user list. And then inside this callback, we can perform some operation. First of all, we have to join that user in all user room ID. And after we join that user, we can then find user and update the socket ID. So we can now make use of our active schema using the find one and update. So we are going to be finding the user with the user email. So it accepts the email, which is the user.email. And then we can just set the new socket ID of that user, which is coming from this object over here. And then we have to make sure set the new to true. So these are just Mongo's way of doing things. And then we have an error and also a document. So inside here, we have to check whether there is an actual user that just updated. So if something like that happened, then we have to send active user to the last connected user. So this is users. So we have to send active. So we need to send the active users that is already in the database back to the user that just connected. So we can just quickly use the active.find. So that's the way we can grab everything from Mongoose using the schema. Then we get the all users. Then whenever we get these all users inside this callback, we have to grab other users. So other users we have to grab must not contain the same email address of the user that we are updating. So we can use the filter to filter out the email address of this user. So remember that this user is going to be coming from this user over here. Yes. So I wanted to make use of this doc, but in a case that we can still make use of doc or we can make use of user, just know that we just have to filter out the email address or filter out the user that just connected last or been updated last from the already existing users, so that the user can have other users and not returning itself for its resource store. So we can just use the filter, and in the filter we use the structuring and grab the email. So make sure you wrap this properly. So think we didn't add an equal sign here. So this is other users equals to the all users, sorry. So all users we grabbed. So here we are checking for other emails. So let's just give this an other emails. So we can say other emails is not equal to user.email. So that should filter out the user that just connected last or the user that just updated last. Then we have to send other users to the user that just connected last using the io.socket ID. So this socket ID is also coming from the user, so don't forget the updated socket ID. So we have active users, and then we can just pass other users. So one more thing remaining is I think the user join. So the user join is used for new connection whenever a user just joined the room. But one thing we have not yet done is, now we have actually sent back other users to the user that just connected last. How about notifying other users that the user has just connected? So what you just simply have to do is to come under this find one and daily updates. So sorry for that. So under this one, you just have to simply notify other users about updated or joined user. So that's just very simple. You can use the socket dot to all user in the room ID. Like I said, we are going to be using that. Then we have to broadcast. Then when we broadcast, we emit with a broadcast message, and the broadcast is going to have an emitter key. Then we can pass the user that just connected, so which is going to be an array of user. So why you see me spread this is same thing like it's just an object, but I just want to spread that, and then we pass the socket ID of that user that just connected. So there is nothing much there, but for some reason we use an array structure here. That's because the way we are listing it out on our Redux, don't worry, we'll get over there, then you can see how we did that. So right now we've actually done for an update or a user that is just returning or a user that is just being updated. So the next thing we have to do is to listen for user join. So in case that the user doesn't exist in our Mongo schema, we want to add the user as well to the database and also notify other users that a user has just joined. So let's just go ahead and do that. Back in our server.js file, and that is beneath this user updated or updated user. So over here, you just have to listen for on user join. So the user join, so this is join. The user join is going to be accepting all user room ID as well, and also is going to be accepting the user that is just connecting or the new user that is about to join, and also the socket ID of that user. And then we are gonna bring down the callback. So inside this callback, first of all, you make sure you join that user to all user room ID, and then we store this user in active chat. So let's say store new user in active chats. So inside here, we just have to use the active schema, which is going to be using the active schema to create a new object. So we have to spread that user and also the socket ID of that user. Then first of all, we have to find the document and also add the document. So why we have to find the document is in a case that the user already exists. So we don't want a duplicate user. So that is very, very good. We don't want a duplicate user. So we have to find the document or add the document. So in case the user does exist, we don't want to add that user. But in the case that the user doesn't exist, we just want to add that user. So we use active.find1 again. So that is find1, which is going to be taking the user.email. Then it's going to return that user in case the user was found. So we have to check whether the user doesn't exist. In the case that the user doesn't exist, we just have to use the active schema.save, and it's going to be returning a promise with the user that is just saved. Then we can grab the email of that user, because we want to make use of that email to actually compile an object that we are going to be emitting to other users. So just like the way we did over here and filtered out some credentials, that is the last user that just connected, we're also going to be using that same email to filter out our own user, and also emit to others. First of all, we have to emit back to ourselves that we have other users. Then we can now use our credentials to emit to other users, just like we did at the top here. So forgive me for misrepresenting this, but I'm trying my best to break it down so that everyone can understand. So guys, if you've really come this long, do make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button. So whenever we save, what we just want to do is to find active.find, that is to grab all the users from the active chat, which is the users, and then we have to make our construction again, which is other users, which is gonna be taking other users.filter or the users.filter, and as usual we have to grab the email of those users, and we can just map that to other user email. So we can say other emails, and we can say other emails is not equal to our own email, or the new user email, not our own email. So send, so let me just use this nice comment. So send other users to new connected user. So that is going to be still making use of the io dot n socket ID. Don't forget that this socket ID is the socket ID of the user that just connected. Then we emit again active users, which is gonna be other users. So, and lastly, when we are done with this, we have to check. So this one was like when we don't have an active user, or when the user doesn't exist. So in the case that the user does exist, we have to emit, give it an else here, emit to all other users the last joined user, which is going to take in the socket dot to all user room ID as usual. Then we broadcast a message just like we did at the top with an emitter. Then we can broadcast the new user join. Then we pass that user that just connected. So this is like checking whether the user exists. So in the case that the user does exist, this just happens. Or sorry, in the case there is no user, this just happens. But in the case that there is a user, just emit to other users that new user. So we've come really far. Let's just go ahead and refresh our application to see everything that we have done. So if we do have a crash, we are going to be having a crash over here. So let's just check whether we are going to have a crash. So you could see automatically that moves us, and let's go ahead and check in our schema. So let's refresh, and if that's stored perfectly, we should get a zoom. So we didn't get that zoom, and we didn't get anything. And let's kind of check what the problem is. And let's kind of scroll up. So let me kind of check some things. So I was kind of trying to debug this, and I kind of realized that we have user exists over here. So let me grab this and make sure you use the same key value over here. So make sure you use the same value. So I kind of misspelled that, and let's give that a try again and check in our console. Okay, right now you could see it's actually working, but we are kind of having a bad filter of email. So that is on our line 96. So on line 96 here, this is users. So you could see that we actually have to gradually debug this and make sure it's going to actually work the way it should work. So if everything works fine, we don't have to get an error. And when we refresh our Mongoose again, we should get a user in the active users. So first of all, we are gonna get the zoom. So you could see the zoom database, and then we have the active charts, and in the active charts, we have one user. So kind of take notice of the socket ID. And when I give this a refresh, it should automatically update the socket ID when the application is done loading, or when the application is done moving us over to the user list screen. So let's check. It's not going to return this user because that is the same user. And let's refresh. So right now you could see that this socket ID kind of changed, which is very, very good, because if a user happens to be in an active chat room and the user left, so returning the user back to that room is very important. So you have to keep track of the socket ID and use that same socket ID and join the user back to that active room, because those socket ID are the things that the user can actually use to interact to all other users. So we have actually done the first things that we need to do. So the second thing we need to do right now is to grab the active users. So right here you could see that from the beginning we emitted active users, I think twice or 3 times. So this is the first time and this is the second time. Okay, so and let's go ahead and get active users. Of course we are gonna get an empty object because this user is the only user in the database, but if we kind of change the email address, we should be able to get other users. So let me kind of manipulate this email address and update that. And let's now come over to our video actions. So under this user join over here, we could just say socket, or first of all, let's just give that a very nice comment. So get other users. So that is socket.on active users, which is gonna grab those users. And let's kind of console.log those users to see whether we are able to return those users. So checking in our console. Hopefully that should work. So let's refresh. So that didn't work, and let's check. So here I notice I'm misspelling this again. So spell this correctly and emit that and refresh. So hopefully, let's just pray that this time around it works. So right now you could see we have active users. So why you see that we have active users is because the active user here has a different email address. But when we check back in our Mongoose, you could see that this same user is still added back to our database, which is very, very nice. And that has really helped us to control data flow so that we don't have a clash whenever a user joins or whenever a new user joins in our active room ID. So whenever we get a new user, we just have to compile users list. So first of all, I have to grab all users from our Redux because I don't want a duplicate user email. So we have to first of all grab all the emails from our Redux from any existing users. So we have to grab that first. Then we have to check for users as well. So we have to use the new users, that's compiling the new users. We have to map that users. Then what we have to do here is to use the email. So don't worry, when we finish this, you're gonna understand why I'm doing this. So we have the socket ID, we also have the UID and the ID that Mongoose gives us. Then in the callback, we have to make sure that each of these user email doesn't include itself in the email address. Then if that is true, we are going to return every parameter that we have there, the name, the socket ID, and the UID, and also the ID. So when we are done, so whenever, like right here, you can see that we have users that are coming from our database. These are a bunch of users, and also this is also a bunch of users from our Redux. So we have to make sure that the users that are returning here does not exist in our database. So in the case that they do exist, we filter them out, but in the case that it doesn't exist, we return it. So we are not actually using filtering here. Of course, that this looks more like a filter. So what we can do in order to remove undefined is to now use filter lastly, because filter will help us remove every null value or every undefined value. So we can use, I think is the filter. We can use it over there. So for the filter, we grab the data. We can now say the data is not equal to undefined. So whenever that is done, we just have to dispatch a type of all users. So let's go ahead and create our types. So we actually done handling everything for users. So what we have to do next now is to populate the users and make sure that we can be able to display those users, and then we can now start working on our Zoom application. So guys, we really come this far. Make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button, and in the next part we just move ahead. So thank you very much for sticking around. Before you continue, make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button. So in the last part, we have been able to get all the filtered users. So these filtered users are actually coming from our database. so that we don't have duplicate users in our database. So you could see we have a list of users that is not the same email address that we use to log in, which is very nice. And what I can now do here is to dispatch that. So I was thinking that we didn't create that. So we already have a type of all users. So I just have to hit enter to bring that in. And we dispatch that to our Redux. So this is get all users. So we can pass a payload of F filtered users, which is very nice. So one more thing we have not yet handled is for the new user join. So the new user join is also double like the active users. So the new user join is here. Whenever a user join, we have to emit to other users that a new user has joined. So what we can just simply do is very simple. So beneath this, I think it's called active users. We just have to get new user joined. So we can use the socket.on new user join, which is going to grab the user that just joined, and we have to dispatch a type of add new user with a payload of the user that just joined, which is very nice. So I think I hit F11. So just save that. So whenever a new user joins that doesn't exist in the database, it's going to actually store that and also emit to other users that a new user has joined. So that's exactly what we did here. And let's go ahead and display those users. So refreshing our application. So that was supposed to work when we saved that. So I made a mistake here. Change this to users and also change this to filtered users, F users. So you can see we have other users that is being displayed. And checking back here, you can see that the name, I think we have VG0D19. And that's exactly what you see here, VG0D19. So these are just other users that are in the active chat. So we are set to start now working on our Zoom application to actually make use of this group call screen and also use that to create a peer connection using the sockets. And let's go ahead and start that immediately. So whenever we come over to this group call screen, the first thing we have to dispatch is this join screen. And inside this join screen, you could see that we are passing a parameter. I don't actually remember what it's called, but I think I've been referencing this in the wrong way. So we are passing at least a value from this parenthesis called stream. So this is just the stream that we are passing. So we have to display that stream on our own. So this stream as well is going to be storing from the reducer. So we are now going to be making pretty much use of this video reducer. So we are going to be creating our own reducer. But first of all, let's just go ahead and store that. And before we move ahead, we have to grab the user from getState.auth. We also have to just give this a room ID of stream general room. So whatever you want to call your own, you can call your own. So for here, we have to dispatch my stream, which is a payload of stream. And we have to also dispatch a type of add stream, which is gonna be taking our stream and also first of all, it's gonna take our stream. So let me just scroll up a little bit, and it's going to take the user that is actually joining the stream actually. So let's save that and let's join. So why you can see double users is because we are generating a random email address. So at the first place, you could really understand how we did this when we did a little bit of authentication by using the assigned storage. So don't bother if you see like 100 users here. That is because we are using a random email address generator. So I don't think that's an issue as well. At least you can see we have dispatched this, but we don't have a way of handling this. So let's go ahead and handle that immediately. So let's go over to the video reducer. In our introduction, I showed you how our application was going to look like. You would see that we had something like a grid view of video streams. So let's just go ahead and add structures the way we want it to be. So the first one is my stream, which is very essential, the stream of the current user. Then we have the second one to be streams. And then the last one to be remote streams. But I don't think we are going to be making use of the remote stream. In case we have to add something else, then I can just go ahead and add that. But this is what we need for now. So let's just go ahead and handle for the my stream. I think for my stream here, we dispatched my stream, and also we dispatched add stream. So we have the case of my stream, which is gonna return a state of my stream, and we pass the payload of that my stream. And then we have also the case of add stream. So whenever we are dispatching to add stream, we are dispatching with our own credentials, the user that just connected. So what if the user has already been in add stream in the Redux state, and the user happened to leave this screen and decided to come back? We want to still display the user stream but not duplicated. So if you could check here, we are sending the stream of the user and also the user details. What you just have to simply do here is to grab the streams. So we can just filter out status streams. So we are going to be filtering with the email. We're going to be making sure that the payload.email, remember, is an object, is not equal to the email of any existing stream. Just filter that one out, then we can just return anything in our state. And then for the stream itself, okay, in our state, okay, we have streams. Yes, we have streams. Then we can spread the streams, the non-duplicated streams, and then can pass in the payload, which is very nice, which is going to return our stream and also the existing stream that is not our own initially. So let's go ahead and save that, and that is going to refresh our application. So after we add to stream, we can now open a PeerJS connection. So scrolling down here, so I went too far. I can now open a PeerJS connection. So let's just say peer starts here. So we say peer server.on open. So whenever we open a peer connection, it's gonna give us a peer ID. So this peer ID is used by the peer WebRTC to actually know that a user is connected on the server. Then we dispatch a type of add my peer ID. So this add my peer ID is very good, but I don't think we actually need it, because we are not going to be disconnecting from this peer server. So for some reason, I don't want us to do that for now. Let's just focus on the basic part of this, so that will give you an ideology of how you can do the next thing. So we just have to emit join stream room. So the join stream room is going to use this peer ID and create an offer. So we have the socket ID as well. The socket ID just to use that, and let's say to add the socket ID into a room. So the room ID is actually this stream general room here. So let's say you also want to create a general message for others. You can actually use that room ID to emit a message and send to all users there. And beneath here, we have the socket ID. Then we can pass the user that is just connecting. So whenever we emit, let's go over to our server and come down here. So this is supposed to be, socket. I think for the socket, I think we went too far, and that is supposed to be inside this IO. So we have to listen for peer connections. Now for peer connections, is going to be taking the socket.on join stream room, and it's going to be accepting the room ID, the peer ID as well, the socket ID, and also the user. Then whenever we are done inside that, we have to return a callback. Then a callback is going to join that user to the room ID, and is going to emit to other users in that same room. So we have to emit to room ID dot broadcast dot emit user connected. So we are emitting back with the peer ID, the user, the room ID, and also the socket ID. So you can see that this is just like when you are, well, don't worry, I will still explain some things to you when we are done with this tutorial, but at least you could see how we are actually using this peer ID to connect to our server. Then we emit that to other users. So other users are going to be receiving this message or these parameters over here on user connected. So I'm just going to grab this user connected so that I wouldn't make mistake again. So whenever a user connects, beneath this peer server, it's just very simple. You can just say socket.on, you paste that user connected, and it's going to accept those peer ID, the user, the room ID of the user that just connected, the socket ID of that user, and then it's going to return a callback, and it's going to connect to a new user. So whenever we are connecting, we still have to just pass these parameters. So we are going to quickly create that function called connect users. And it's going to accept everything here. So quickly, let's connect that. So we are still going to come back to this one, but at least you could see that we can be able to connect a new user. Whenever a new user joins the chat room, we can be able to connect to that user. So when this happens, we just have to make a call to this last user that just connected from other devices. So we say call the last user from other devices. So we just use a call, and we use the peer server.call. We are just calling with the peer ID, and also then we can just pass our own personal stream. And for this stream, I think it's going to be coming from here, which is our stream. So our stream is exactly what you see that we pass at the top here. So we are going to be using that our stream. So each user or each individual is going to be using his or her stream, and then call the user that just connected. So here we can just pass down that stream. So you can see that color changes. So whenever we make a call, right now the application is awaiting some call. So at the end of this tutorial, we are going to test run everything, but just know that everything we are doing here, I'm going to be explaining it so that everyone can understand as we move along. So whenever other users call back the user that just connected, they are going to be calling the user with the peer ID. The peer server manages everything for us, then with their personal streams, so that the personal stream is going to be populating here, or to be populated here. So simply what we just have to do is to answer the call back from this user that just connected last. Then that will now lead us to move a little bit at the top. So right here, we can just say last user receives a call. So whenever a last user receives a call, we make use of the peer server dot on call, and it's going to accept a call. So the user needs to answer back. The user that was just called back needs to answer back. So we can say answer back to all remote streams. Then we can just say call.answer. So remember that this stream here as well is also the stream of the user that just connected. So whenever that happens, we just have to populate all the users that we just answered, populate their streams on our screen over here. So we can just say answer the. So guys, sorry, let me kind of check some things. So we are still on the right track. So the last user answered the stream with his own stream. So what is happening here is just that both users have been able to call themselves, but right now they are not able to actually get their data or kind of know who is calling who. So for this one now is answering back from all the devices that just made a call to us. So when we answer, we want to now make sure that we can be able to use this stream and display it on each individual devices. So that's going to make us to answer back from remote streams. So we can just say answer the remote calls back from the last device. So we can say call.onStream, which is going to get the remote streams and then here we can add other streams to stream array. That's other user streams to stream array. So here we can just quickly dispatch a type of add stream and then with a payload of the remote users. So this is where things kind of needs to get complicated. So for the remote users here is going to actually take this something like this. The remote users have to be coming with their stream and also with their user. So that's not an issue. So what I just did here was very simple. I just created for the remote streams as well. Then for the name itself, we just created a random ID. Then for the UID, we also created a random UID. So what we just simply did here is just very simple. Just to make sure that we have something unique that we can actually use to handle our mapping on our view. So this one, I just changed this to john@gmail.com. Let it just be like other users calling, trying to display that. But here we can just give it a random email. So when we give it a random email, it's still going to populate it here. And then when it populates it here, we can see other users. So right now, this is what's happening. Other users answering a call from the last device or answering the remote calls from the last device. So what about the remote devices need to answer the call that this one has made also? So like we call the remote streams over here. So we have to also create an answer just like this one. So let's just quickly go ahead and do that. So we can say get, or let's say remote users answers the last connected device. So this is gonna be called on stream last user stream. It's gonna return a callback So we can just make sure we have a last user stream. So if we don't have a last user stream, we just have to dispatch a type of add remote stream, then with a payload of stream, last user stream, and also the user. So that's it. So right now we are done with this answering calls for both of the streams. So whenever this one can't work, except this user picks the call. So you can even go ahead, anyway, you can go ahead and it wouldn't work because this on call must first take place. So, but right here you could see that whenever a user calls, we can just pick directly from that user. Then whenever there is a call going on, we can even first of all perform this operation before we do this. But you see, you can't do that. You must make sure make a call. So when you make a call, the user answers the call over here. The last user answers the call. Then whenever the last user answers the call, there will not be a connection to other users, to other streams over here. Then the other streams now can be able to stream back the last user that's connected. So that's exactly what you see here. So let's just go ahead and undo the reducers, and that will be the end of the tutorial. We've really come this far. So we've already handled for the add stream. So what's remaining here is remove stream for the user that just connected lastly. And you just have to come down here. You can say case of add remove stream. We're just going to return. So what if in a case that we have remove streams with the same email address? So we have to make some filter. We can just say other streams, state.streams.filter. So we have the email. You can say the payload.email is not equal to the remove streams that is already in our state. Then can now replace the streams with other streams, and then the payload of any user that just answered our call from payload. So we are actually done. Guys, please make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button. And it's now remaining for us to test run our application to see how far everything has done or how far we have come. So whenever we join over here, we should be able to make call and also perform some operations which are very important, like receiving a call from remote streams. So right now, let's go ahead and give that a try. So guys, in case you kind of encounter error, I actually made a mistake over here. So this is supposed to be a comma, then we wrap everything here in a parenthesis. So kind of go ahead to fix that, and that way actually fix your application. So hopefully when we open our application over here, everything should work pretty fine, because I kind of tried it and I was having a crash. And make sure you restart your server, and let's go ahead and run the application once more to see whether we can be able to use double devices to join the chats. So finally guys, you can see that the application is working now, and if we have multiple users, they will all display together in this group call screen. So we have come to the end of the tutorial. Please do make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button, and don't forget to also share with your friend and hit the subscribe button as well. So thank you, and see you on the next tutorial. Take care and have a good day. Bye bye.